4 federal judge nominees sitting before the United States Senate, and not one of them, not a single one, would say out loud that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. 4 people auditioning to be federal judges, people who will decide the law of this land. And they couldn't answer the most basic, factual question in American politics. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse didn't just push back, he dismantled them. On camera, in real time. But that's not even the most dangerous part of this story. Because buried inside this hearing is a revelation that should terrify every single person in this country. The U.S. Marshal Service, the agency responsible for protecting federal judges, is refusing to investigate the people behind death threats against those very judges. Let that sink in. Watch what happens next.
Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the 4 of you look. Spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left? What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you with the executive branch leaning in on you to give these ridiculous answers today? I'm really sorry to have to go through this and that you have to go through this. But it would be nice if you could tell your executive branch handlers, for instance, Ms. Clark, I'm supported by Lindsey Graham. He's a friend of President Trump. He's the second senior person on the Republican side in the Judiciary Committee. He's likely to be the next Judiciary Committee chair. I think I'll be okay. I don't need to make myself ridiculous at your direction. It'd be great if you could have said that. It would be great if your answers were simple and honest here today. It's really disappointing. Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
Senator, as a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
Do you agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westerkamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
solicitation, would that be
yes.
one? Solicitation
Yes.
of a threat?
Yes.
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
Yes.
Yes. How about, and it's the product of an enterprise under the racketeering statutes. Would that also be another way that liability could extend beyond the utterer?
That is correct, Senator.
Can you think of any others, Ms. Lane, where liability extends beyond the utterer of the threat? What are some of the legal theories that would support that kind of investigation and prosecution?
Senator, the doctrines you mentioned, I would agree with, and I would just look always to the federal law and federal statutes guiding that.
Mr. Recchi?
Senator, I would agree with that. I think you covered the major ones: conspiracy, RICO. There may be other avenues of potential legal liability, but I think you covered the three big ones in that scenario.
Ms. Westerkamp, you agree?
Senator, I'm not aware if there are any more with my practice before the Court of International Trade and Court of Federal Claims that doesn't touch on criminal law.
So here's why I asked you these questions. I asked you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshal Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshal Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshal Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that. And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories. And we need to fix that. We need to fix that.
Now, let's hear what the former CIA director has to say about Donald Trump as protests continue to spread.
Have you, in negotiations that you have been privy to, ever seen a commander-in-chief say that peace negotiations were ongoing while simultaneously threatening the nation in question with physical force?
No, I don't think anybody ever has. It's clear that there's this toxic mix of traits that Donald Trump has, which is he's a pathological liar, he is incompetent on so many fronts, and he's also deeply corrupt, which I think is now being manifesting itself in terms of the Gulf War. That's why you have these wholly incoherent, wholly inconsistent flailing about because, first of all, again, there was no real rationale for this war. Secondly, he's trying to figure out what his next move is, and he doesn't understand exactly how he's going to get himself out of this mess. And thirdly, the Iranians now seem to have a lot more influence and cards to play, especially in terms of the Strait of Hormuz and allowing shipping to get out or not. And so therefore, I think Donald Trump is trying to present a false narrative to the American public by saying, yes, the Iranians now seem more reasonable. They're trying to negotiate. But, you know, he's protected himself for so many years in this cocoon of disinformation. But the reality now is just penetrating and taking away that cocoon. And it's very clear in terms of how the war is going. Yes, we're decimating the Iranian military. But in terms of finding an off-ramp or getting out of it, as American consumers see their gas prices rise when they fill up their cars. So across the board, which is why, you know, talking about the No Kings rally, and let's not forget Bruce Springsteen, a New Jersey guy, you know, in Minneapolis.
Jersey corner.
Jersey has issues with chat.
But intelligence analysts look for trends. And we see a trend here. And we also look for, okay, if there's a trend of demonstrations of protests, what is fueling it? Is the fuel going away or is the fuel increasing? And both on the domestic front and on the international front, there is more and more fuel that is feeding those fires of protests and demonstrations. And what are these protesters looking toward? Looking toward the November elections. So again, I think the people who are organizing these rallies recognize that there is still several months, you know, before the November elections, and they want to make sure that that momentum is going to continue and that the people are going to feel as though that their voices are making a difference.
I'm struck by intelligence analysts look for trends. That's the trend with the protesters and the people in this country raising their voices. What is the trend then you see from this administration?
Well, I see his.
George Bush, like,
Well, you pointed out the 33% approval rating of Donald Trump. That's a trend. It's a downward trend. It's a bad trend. We see that inflation is going to go up as a result of increased energy prices and across the board. So, I think that the trend is that they are doubling down in Iran, which is unfortunate, because if they start to deploy troops, they put troops on Iranian soil, it's just going to get worse. And so it seems as though they're digging more and more as a way to justify and validate their initial decision to go in there. And another trend I see, unfortunately, is with Israel.
Let's recap what just happened in this single hearing. 4 nominees for lifetime judicial appointments refused to confirm a documented historical fact. A sitting senator had to explain out loud on the record why that makes them unfit to sit on any bench in America. The U.S. Marshals are stonewalling investigations into death threats against federal judges. And a former CIA director just said, under his own name, the President of the United States is a pathological liar with a 33% approval rating, who is now trapped in a war he doesn't know how to end. These are not talking points. These are statements made under oath, on the record, by people with firsthand knowledge. So ask yourself one question. If they're willing to show you this much in public, what are they hiding in private? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe, because the next video goes even deeper.